Hey guys, it's Dani. Today we're gonna talk all about setback, what it is, why it happens, how we can avoid it to some extent, and why sometimes it's absolutely unavoidable. Now, the inspiration for this video is this particular orchid, which is finally reblooming for me for the very first time. You would not believe how long I have been caring for this orchid. 5 years. You will see a screenshot of one of the videos that I made at the time with this orchid, and you can check the date, which I cannot edit. YouTube adds it under each and every video and nobody can edit that. So yeah, 2014, 5 years without a few months. Now, why didn't this orchid bloom for me in all of this time? Well, setback really. This is one of those worst case scenarios of setback where you can have an orchid so stressed that it will not bloom for years and years and years. In my case, 5 years. And I actually asked you guys in the community section on the front page of my YouTube channel, what orchid do you think this is? And Edster June was the first one to guess. This is the Brassavola Jiminy Cricket, indeed. There were quite a few of you who guessed it as well, but I cannot believe that you guys remember this, even if it was a wild guess. This is a special orchid for me because my mom saw it in the store, she picked it up for me, and it's a bit of a miracle that we could find something like this in a normal grocery shop. So I cannot tell you how happy I am that she finally blooms, but I'm not so happy about the history, which we're gonna get into today. So we call setback a phenomenon that happens when orchids are stressed. If we imagine that the orchid's growth are steps forward, a setback is a step backwards. It's regression. And this is because when orchids are stressed, they don't necessarily just pause and wait for a good opportunity to grow healthy again. They still grow, but they grow underdeveloped structures. Hence the name setback, not pause or anything of the sorts. Visually, we can detect setback when an orchid simply doesn't grow up to its norm. Take, for example, this monopodial orchid. We can see that the leaves are pretty long, but at some point in its life, the leaves just grew very, very tiny. And afterwards, it started to grow big or actually long normal leaves again. This is a sign of setback, and that's how it visually looks like on monopodial orchids. Since they don't have pseudobulbs or other structures such as fans, a setback will look like tinier leaves, certainly much tinier than normal. And this will lead to less photosynthesis and less energy created for new structures. On sympodial orchids such as oncidiums, cattleyas, dendrobiums, and others, things are visually even more apparent. Looking at this orchid, we can see that the oldest pseudobulb is a lot bigger than one of the newer pseudobulbs. Seeing this orchid, you might think that this tinier pseudobulb is an older pseudobulb, but it's not, because the new growth is here, and it's coming from that tiny pseudobulb. So the way this orchid grew was from here to the center of the pot. This is a clear sign of setback on this particular sympodial orchid. And just like in the first case, there are many disadvantages. One of them is that the orchid will not store enough energy and nutrients for growing a properly sized new growth perhaps, or even for blooming. For sympodials, small underdeveloped structures will most of the times mean no blooms. So as you can suspect, setbacks are not a reason for celebration. Not only can they delay flowering, but also they typically mean slower growth for our orchid. And as I was saying, setbacks occur when orchids are stressed. So I'll go really fast through the main stress factors because we've talked about them in the past. One of the vital structures is missing or it's not in adequate quantities. The vital structures of orchids are roots, leaves, and pseudobulbs for those orchids which produce pseudobulbs. If one of these components is missing or it's damaged, the entire orchid will suffer. I will share with you down below in the description 2 videos that I made on roots and leaves, talking about their functions and why they are so important to the orchid. Making a very fast resume, the roots make sure that the orchid gets hydration and nutrients, and the leaves photosynthesize and pretty much produce the food of the orchid, the energy. So without the ingredients and a proper kitchen to cook the food, obviously the orchid will not eat, so it will not grow to its full capacity. In the vast majority of cases, we can trace down the source of the stress to these two elements, either roots, either leaves. Pseudobulbs in some cases, since they are storage devices, obviously they will store food and they will help new growth, but even with storage devices, in lack of roots or leaves, the orchids will suffer a degree of setback. Many of the times, setback can be observed after repotting, and this is because it's the main cause of root damage. When we repot orchids, there is a great chance that the initial roots will not make the transition to the new medium. Also, we might be dealing with an already sick orchid, or we're simply not careful how many roots we cut. No matter the reason, after a repot, when we're dealing with the actual roots, chances increase to obtain a setback orchid. And to some degree, some setback is to be expected, is considered normal with some orchids, but in cases of complete lack of root system, the setback will be very, very dramatic. To try and avoid as much as possible this type of setback, growers started to develop some rules. One of them is repot at the right time. Repot when the orchid starts to create tiny new roots, nubbins. If we repot at this time, even if we mess up the old root system, there is a brand new root system on the way. So the period of time in which the orchid will not be able to absorb water and nutrients will be minimal. Let's imagine that I am going to repot this orchid when new roots are 3 months away. Well, I'm gonna have 3 months of this orchid not being able to properly hydrate herself or absorb nutrients. So she will deplete itself. So if we know we are going to damage the existing root system, it is in our best interest to wait for brand new roots to start forming and afterwards to repot. Other methods include completely switching to inorganic media. One of the main reasons we repot orchids in traditional organic media is decomposition and degradation of the existing medium. Through repotting, we refresh the medium. The downside to that is that we are disturbing the roots. Using a fully inorganic medium which does not decompose eliminates the need to repot so frequent. It also eliminates the need to remove all of the pieces from between the roots, because inorganic medium doesn't decompose, it's not organic. This type of medium has its own drawbacks, but at least when it comes to repotting and setting back orchids, this does have the upper hand over the organic medium. Other techniques include preparing the orchid before repotting, watering it 1 or 2 days before repotting so that we make sure the orchid is hydrated. Also, completely soaking the orchid or the medium right before repotting to make the roots more flexible and less prone to breakage. There are many techniques that growers use that work for them, all in the interest of protecting the roots as much as possible. Sadly though, there isn't an 100% successful method of not ruining the root system. Once the roots attach to something, detaching them will cause them damage. And some orchids are simply very sensitive, such as cattleyas. Hence, whenever we repot, we risk setting back the orchid. Now, some setback can be mild. For example, in this case, this orchid didn't seem to produce bigger and bigger leaves, but it didn't really produce smaller and smaller leaves either. They kind of stayed at the same size. Now, this is pretty much to be expected. It's a new orchid, it had to adapt to the environment, it has been repotted twice. It has pulled through all of these things because it never actually remained without roots or without leaves. So in some cases, and depending what type of orchid you're dealing with, a little bit of setback is okay, is mild. It's not gonna mean that your orchid will not bloom for 5 years. I am presuming this leaf, which is growing now, will be bigger than these two because I do have enough leaves to photosynthesize. I do have quite a nice root system, and the orchid is completely adapted to my environment and to all of the parameters it is receiving. So there is no reason for it to be set back, and this certainly does not mean that the orchid will not bloom. Actually, this orchid was in bloom even so this year. Now, leaves can actually be lost in various ways. We can deal with sunburn, and in this instance, I did have quite a few very serious cases. I will link you down below to them. Sun can actually scorch an entire orchid, and if all the leaves are lost, then the orchid will go through quite an extensive period of setback before it bounces back. It will create small leaves at first, and as it grows, each one will be bigger than the previous one. But this process can take a lot of time, even years. Spider mites, mealybugs, and other pests known to seriously attack the leaves can lead to complete loss of the leaf system. Once an orchid is lacking all of its leaf, you can rest assured that it will go through some degree of setback. In this case, it is always better to prevent than to treat. Preventative treatments against pests are really helpful, and I do have my own DIY non-toxic technique, link down below in the description. We have to make sure that our orchid does not sit in the sun and pretty much try to prevent whatever can harm leaves. Now, you will find growers or articles claiming that taking care of one of these vital structures will actually compensate for the other. For example, if we lose all of the leaf system on the orchid, we can just expose the roots to light because they photosynthesize, so they will take place of the leaves. Hence, we should not have setback with our orchid, or not a lot. And also, if we lose the entire root system of an orchid, we can try to hydrate the orchid through the leaves. In practice, you will discover that none of these techniques actually work. And this is because these structures cannot really take the place of others. Yes, the roots can photosynthesize, but they will not photosynthesize as much as the leaves would. So even though this might offer a little bit of help, it is nothing like the leaves, certainly much less than you expect. Also, hydration through leaves doesn't really work all that well. Certainly, you will not avoid setback if you try to hydrate the orchid through the leaves. Nothing can compare to hydration through the root system. Whatever hydration you will obtain from the leaves will definitely not save you from setback. If that were true, nobody would have setback anymore. But this does not mean that we cannot save and grow these orchids. So now let's talk about how to deal with the setback orchid. First of all, roots can actually be assisted and to some extent even promoted. In the description, you'll have a more extensive discussion on this, but maintaining humidity high around the root zone, I discovered, makes a very big difference. Root tips that emerge don't stop growing due to the lack of humidity in the air. And with a setback orchid, and potentially one without roots and without too much energy, this is crucial. You don't want the new roots to be impaired in any way. So you don't want the root tips to dry out or be munched by snails or things of the sorts. And also, I make sure that rootless orchids are always in the presence of water. They're always on top of a damp sphagnum moss bed, which is temporary. It's only there to assist the roots, and after I have some roots, I usually switch them to their final pot. Once roots start to get going, the orchid will get hydrated. We can expect small growth at first, but each new growth will be bigger and bigger until at some point the new growths will just be the normal size for the orchid. Along the way, we might experience orchids not looking all that great, nutrient deficiency due to the lack of roots, due to stretching those resources to put out new growths and roots. The way to recovery might definitely not look pretty, but the results, if enough patience and attention is given, is absolutely worth it. The same goes for orchids which remained without leaves. The first growths will be tinier, but as new growths appear, each one will be better than the last one because we will have gradually more and more leaf surface to photosynthesize, and of course more roots to absorb water and nutrients and assist photosynthesis. It is safe to assume that with these underdeveloped growths, we will not have blooms, or if we do, we will have a pretty under the norm flower spike or flower. Sometimes I personally prefer to completely remove the flowers or flower spikes just so the orchid does not waste precious energy on flowers when it could invest it in roots and leaves, and at some point when everything is back to normal, I can let it invest its energy in blooms. So this period of bouncing back can take anywhere from a year to, as you could see, 5 years. And in this time, the orchid might not look its best, might not bloom, but do rest assured that it will return to normal once again. What is worse is if during this recovery period more stress comes along. And this is what happened to my pretty little orchid. I purchased it, I repotted it. When I repotted it, it had no roots. So I thought, well, I couldn't possibly have snail eggs on the rhizome, right? Wrong. So as the new roots were growing, the snails munched them. Then I got the orchid out, I repotted it in sterilized media, in boiled media, which was a big mistake, and now I know better. And you guys know that I always tell you never boil organic media. She taught me that. So I put her in that media, and 2 weeks later things started to smell so bad, and the roots got completely damaged and completely burned. So I had to re-encourage new roots. At some point they appeared. But at some point I thought, you know what? I think mounted orchids are fun. But I didn't take into account that my particular climate could not really give enough humidity with the time that I could spend on watering to this orchid, which was recovering. So it got set back once again on a mount. Half of it was given away to somebody, and the half that I had really didn't look so good. I decided to pot it, but then guess what? I had to switch countries. I came here, and here this orchid sat without medium for 3 weeks because life sometimes gives you lemons. And then she got dehydrated once again, and I lost the root system once again. And for 3 years, I've been working on recovering this orchid. So 2 years prior to me moving here and 3 years here, that's a lot of continuous setback. But finally, this orchid is recovered. You can see the root system is not the most spectacular you've ever seen, but it is enough for this orchid to finally have enough energy to create a good enough new growth with a sheath and a bud emerging. And in the end, it's a long wait, but it is a very, very educational wait. And I do want to pass on this information and teach you all about my experience, and you will get your own experiences, but sometimes I do believe that some things can simply be avoided. Alrighty guys, so thank you so much for watching this video. Hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you do learn something from my experience. So that said, you know the drill. Like or dislike this video below, subscribe to my channel for regular orchid videos, tutorials, Q&As, and other fun orchid subjects. And if you'd like to support the channel, do consider visiting the merch store down below. We have limited edition Nelly Eiler stuff. It will go away in 2 weeks or so, on the 21st. So hurry up, because it's gonna be gone forever. If you want to get it, now is the moment. And with that said, I hope you have a great weekend. I'll see you next time. Bye.